the quote with William Penn is basically saying that some of the Indian peoples he met reminded him of the Jews of London. And he's talking about Sephardic Jews. So he's saying these people resembled them in appearance, but also there were aspects of their customs that reminded them as well. In terms of, time by moons, circumcision, right? That's not something everybody, people say, do easily. That's a very unusual practice, per se, that we know has its roots primarily and probably in what's often called sub-Saharan Africa, and probably in the area of Nubia or Somalia. And then that practice goes north into Kemet, and then it will spread into areas of Asia. And then, of course, we know it primarily in the context of the Hebrew practice, right? Where then, Abraham or Ibrahim is instructed to circumcise his male children, and all descendants will do that who are male, thereafter. So things like that, which were getting people's attention and going, well, that's a rather odd practice, right? William Penn is known as he's considered the primary founder of what is the colony of Pennsylvania, which then becomes, of course, the state of Pennsylvania. He comes to the Americas in the early part of the 18th century, when the Americas, as far as the Europeans are concerned, are primarily under British control, certainly in the north. The Spanish are controlling the southern portions of the Americas, and the British are controlling the northernmost portions. In a 1623 text by Robert Harcourt, who was an Englishman, he reports on the friendly Indians of Moronia, which was a province of Guyana, which is where, by the way, Ivan van Sertima was from. He was from British Guyana. And Harcourt had described these Egyptian-like pyramids among them, and saying that a very high hill called Kalipani, fashioned like a sugar loaf or a pyramid, existed. So things like that are just reminding us again that when Europeans came here, they were finding evidence of things like pyramids here. In fact, I think it's Jack Forbes who basically says that there's so much about American history that we know so little of, meaning pre-Columbian American history, that because we haven't focused on that pre-Columbian American history. And I would say it's by design, because if you looked at it, the obvious connections to Africa, the obvious connections to Asia would come out. One of the other things that Van Sertima talked about in his book, They Came Before Columbus, was how there were Chinese accounts, Chinese records from the 11th, I think it's the 11th and 13th, or the 12th and 13th centuries, AD or CE, which talk about Chinese expeditions and African expeditions of trade that took them across the Atlantic, and meaning to the Americas, Right. So, whether it's Abu Bakari sources and the Raud, I might be mispronouncing this, but Roudh Arkartos, the Raud Arkartos, which is one of the writings, the Sudanic writings, that talks about the Malian excursions or expeditions and trade across to the Americas in the early 14th century. And that would not have been the first, because as I said, you have this ancient Kemetic connection that's largely associated with the Olmec. Then you have the period of the African, if you will, Islamic era associated with the Moors and Mali, that both are two different waves of this influence of an African presence here. And like I said, an Asian or Asiatic presence as well. Al-Idrisi, who produced a map. Actually, it was a silver globe. It was a globe, actually. Al-Idrisi was a Moorish cartographer and scholar who served in the court of Roger II, who was one of the rulers of Sicily in the 11th century, I think. It was either the 11th or the 13th century. And he produced, no, it was the 11th, right, 11th century. And he produced this globe, and he had a companion book that he gave to Roger II to use, and it included different zones of the world. I'm curious as to what was on that map when it showed the zone that was the Americas, because it did indicate that there was something, as I said earlier, beyond the sea of fog and darkness. And even some recent scholarship looking at the Venetian merchants, knowing something about the trade routes to the Americas. And understand that at that time, if you knew the trade routes to the Americas with all the unique goods that you could acquire from there, plus you had a market, you didn't want everybody to know about that route. You wanted to monopolize the route. So I recently, and I can't remember where I had read it, but had read about there was a historian talking about some Venetian sources that indicated that, yes, there were Venetian merchants who knew the routes and had gotten the information from the Moors, gotten the information from African Islamic sources.